Right. Okay. Hey guys. As you might expect, today's content is a little bit different than usual because we're going to be talking about some Loomian Legacy lore. Basically, I actually have had a theory in mind that I've just kind of been looking through, researching, and just kind of digging into what Loomian Legacy actually has to offer in terms of lore for us. You know, talking to some of the NPCs, you can actually find some interesting tiny little bits of lore if, when put together, actually kind of pulls together a nice little narrative. A lot of it has to do with me using my imagination, but I don't know why you wouldn't as well, so I'm just gonna kind of be giving my thoughts on the whole thing. But basically, you know, you talk to the NPCs and you look through basically all sorts of this other stuff, which I'll get into in a bit, but you just kind of start to piece together this whole narrative of the fact that there was actually a lot to do. You know, there's a lot in Loomian Legacy, and it all happened before we existed, and it's not necessarily important to the story or big lore wise, but it's just something I figured I'd discuss with you guys today, and that's surrounding the idea of ancient Roria and what it was really like. Basically, you know, like you got this kid and the old man that kind of talk about Cheshma's history, where like you can see up there with the whole kind of ruins that are supposedly unable to be seen, but you know, you got like the dog statues, the one that appears up there and the one that appears over in Igneous, and they just kind of like they point to having to do with something. I can't really say what yet. It could be something similar to the dog trio that's in like, you know, Pokemon, but we can't really say for sure. They could have a similar purpose or they could have an entirely different purpose, but at this point we really have no way of saying what that is exactly, but they definitely point at something to do with what I think has a lot to do with what ancient Roria was like before like all of this happened and all of the story. So my idea is that actually there was, well, I mean, it basically says as much, but there was a kingdom of Roria. Originally, Roria was possibly all united under one group of people, and these group of people were possibly very diverse, but also very connected. But something happened that seemingly separated them, and we can see this throughout the land, just kind of by the way that the land is so diversified. Like, you look at the first few towns, and they seem pretty normal, but then you get, say, to Sylvant, which is very modernized compared to the next town over, which is much more traditional, specifically for maybe Japanese customary standards type thing over in Heiwa, or however it's pronounced, basically. But what I think happened was there was a split. There was a split of culture after perhaps maybe a large fight broke out, or there could have been even something similar to what's actually going on right now, which is kind of like a history repeating itself type scenario, where basically someone was unsatisfied with the current relationship humans and Loomians had, and so they tried to fight for that kind of change. And so while they were fighting for that change, what ended up happening was people became separated. And it's almost super low key, but it's not necessarily important because for the most part, people do still seem to get along, but they've just all branched off and they've all formed their own separate cultures in their own separate small areas, which is really fascinating to me because as a whole, the continent of Roria is generally pretty small, at least as far as, say, a whole continent goes, and that could just be the building scale of things, but it's really interesting to me at how diverse it is. It's got super modern, maybe Western American type buildings, and then there's like, you know, we've also got Sephirite, which is just as modern, but it actually has a lot more clutter and trash. And there's like this whole difference. And also, back to kind of the whole idea of ancient Roria and what it was like. When I say there's a kingdom, it's because I've got dex entries that back me up on this quite a bit. So for example, up first, we actually have Seer Knight, which directly states that it was actually used as basically a knight for the kingdoms and the royal members of Roria back in the old days. And also, like, say a fairy tale, for example, there was a hero, which you can see actually in Valkyrie's dex entry, as it refers to as it was a mount, and it was also used by the legendary hero as his trusty Loomian. And I find this really interesting because that means if there was a hero, there must have been a villain. So that tells me that something happened. Something used to happen. And also Zulong. It was, I guess, almost feared as like a demigod, Loomian of sorts. Which is kind of like, it reminds me of the whole Heiwa tradition type stuff. It feels like that's kind of like their culture mixed together, more like Asian culture. So they were very diverse, but they're not really so diverse now. They're more separate, if anything, I think. Like, they're all there, and it's really cool seeing, like, all the diversity and stuff, but it's really interesting because it makes you really wonder what happened a long time ago that led to Roria being where it is today. And I'm also equally surprised because, to my knowledge, no one really talks about this. And also, coming up right here is Pure Mind and Ferroglyph. More specifically, Ferroglyph is supposedly actually served ancient rulers. So, I don't know, based off of this kind of, specifically Pharaoh's entry, it makes me wonder if we're ever going to get like a desert town, kind of like we had in Brick Bronze, in which there may be like the ruins of an old actual like kingdom and a temple, so kind of similar. And then there's Infernix, which I also felt was related because the Phoenix and like you've got Pure Mind, both of them I felt like they just kind of go somewhat hand in hand, and they also have both very interesting entries. Which was unique, especially compared to the other fossil Loomians, but I don't really know how to put it otherwise. It was interesting. And other than that, you know, it's there, I think just something happened that's just kind of hard to describe. Maybe, like, other than the war, something else happened, and there was maybe a split. And that could also kind of, like, bring in our old Brick Bronze into the whole scenario, which actually makes me wonder kind of a lot. Like, is time travel related to this? Is it time travel? Or is it maybe... How do I describe it? It could be time travel, or it could just be space travel, and that's what's curious to me. Something that isn't super explicit about Loomian Legacy as a whole is the when it's occurring, because obviously it's occurring now, but something that actually, you know, I feel like should get everyone kind of thinking is, did Jake also travel through time, or did Jake just travel through dimensions? Because something that we may notice is the way Midas Town and Cheshma and the placement of basically the first few routes are extremely similar to the Roria that everyone else knows and loves. But after that, it separates, so there's most likely the chance that it's an entirely different universe, possibly speaking. Which probably was actually implied in Brick Bronze, but it also just kind of interests me, because, like, you've got all this diversity going on and stuff, but other than that, like, what happened up until that point just kind of is interesting to me. I don't know. This is something I want to describe with you guys, though. This is something I've kind of had on my mind for a while. I don't really know how to describe it. But, you know, this is just something I kind of figured I'd actually get off my mind and talk to you guys about just for a quick, maybe 10 minutes, basically. But, I don't know, if you guys have anything you want to discuss about it, feel free to bring it up in the Discord, link in the description, by the way. Or just kind of, I want to build on this, and if anyone else sees this, you know, like any of the other YouTubers, this is something I'd actually really want to talk about, because it's something that isn't being talked about. Like, Roria's past, this Roria's past, and stuff like that. But, yeah. I don't really know what to talk about otherwise. Anyways, hope you guys have a nice day. I'm actually gonna hop off, so yeah. See you around.